Live.
For those of you in industries that are not connected to radio broadcasting, this might make your eyes roll over in the back of your head. And we really respect you as both New Voodoo clients and prospects. So we'll spare you the agony and say, unless you're in the radio broadcast business, unless you have a fascinating curiosity about how we play Moneyball behind the scenes, this is probably not the presentation for you. However, if you're in radio, even if you're a wily vet, and especially if you are somebody relatively new to your job and going through a crash course on Nielsen 101, I can't recommend more highly a session than we're about to see. My special guest is Mark O'Neill from ROI Media Solutions. He's going to give the PhD or master's version. I guess he didn't want me to oversell it too much. The master's version of a presentation that my colleagues, Lee Jacobs, Carolyn Gilbert, and PJ Kling gave at the All Access Radio Summit called Moneyball for Radio. That presentation is available on our website at newvoodoo.com/webinars. And I actually highly recommend that you look at that presentation first. That's the foundation for what we're going to talk about today, which is essentially a deeper, more in-depth, into the weeds version of that presentation. Today's 20-minute presentation is really about understanding the true measurement. And it's not going to be great news, but for those of you armed with the facts, will be better prepared to deal with the competitive reality. This is a survival game that we're in right now. And Mark, I can't think of a better person to have along for the ride. You actually are a literal ratings expert in that part of your career was spent behind the scenes at Arbitron.
Well, not so much behind the scenes in that it was the New York and Laurel at the time sales offices, which was fairly visible, but certainly had the opportunity to learn a lot there.
Behind the curtain would be a good way.
That was the basis for what I have been doing as a consultant since.
Well, so let's get into it. Moneyball. What do we really mean by that?
Moneyball was actually a term that I'll show you where that came from. The presentation that we're going to look at today is an updated version of one that I've been doing for a good long while. Back in 2012, I was invited to speak at the Arbitron Consultant Fly-In, and gave a presentation. And the day after that, Tom Taylor, who was writing his daily newsletter at the time, actually grabbed the word Moneyball, and he said, call it Moneyball for Radio, where you study the statistical tendencies and play the game smart. And of course, all of that is based on the book that Michael Lewis wrote about Moneyball, about how baseball uses statistics. That, I've loved the subtitle of the book, The Art of Winning an Unfair Game. And if there ever was an art to winning an unfair game, it's the topic that we're talking about today.
And this is a great Brad Pitt movie as well.
Trying to market to the metrics that really make a difference in radio.
All right, so let's get into it. One of the things that we preached in the Moneyball preliminary presentation is that we need to get out of the habit of measuring our success based on an average quarter-hour share. That's a vanity metric. It doesn't mean a whole lot, as you're about to see, when it comes to radio. It really is all about the average quarter-hour rating. So, Mark, let's start defining some things like persons using measured media, average quarter-hour rating, CUME. Just give us a refresher course.
Well, the term that we, when the book first comes out, that we look at is PUM, and that's the overall health of the AQH in the market. PUM is persons using measured media. It's effectively the sum total of all encoded radio stations in the market. So it's market total listening.
And not to be confused with market CUME, correct?
Not to be confused with market CUME. PUM is the AQH, and just as on your station, your AQH is one number, and CUME, the number of different people who are listening, is a much larger number. Same thing happens at the market level. PUM is the sum total of all AQH, and then you can look at market CUME, which is the total number of different people who are listening to radio. But AQH persons at the PUM level basically defines the available audience. It's the equivalent of PUR, persons using radio in the diary methodology. And so it's really the big number that you add up at the bottom of the ranker. And if I take an example market, this is Monday through Sunday, 6 a.m. to midnight. It's a top 20 market. And if you look at the PUM trend over time, starting here back in January of 18 and bring it forward, in March and April of 20 is when we hit the pandemic. And we saw PUM levels, radio usage drop to an unprecedented low level. PUM has been recovering since. And this chart kind of takes us through October of 20. So as I got to the end of the summer of 20 into the early fall, clients were asking, when did I expect PUM to recover to pre-COVID levels? And as I drew this trend line, I thought, well, we'll probably be back in that range somewhere the end of the year, beginning of 2021. But when you think about the longer trend line, there had been about an 8% per year decline in PUM over time. So where those two lines cross is an inflection point. I figured we'd probably make it back to that longer term trend line.
And this natural declination, Mark, you would attribute to the fragmentation of various media options that are available to folks and the obviously Generation Z consuming radio less.
Yes, and I think that also that what's going on with the digital dashboard and the options in the cars all plays into that fractionalization.
About 14% market penetration for the high end stereos. Listen to me, the high end infotainment systems, and that's going up quite rapidly.
So the projection was that somewhere around the end of the year, beginning of 2021, we would be back to that level where we were meeting the longer term trend line. And so if I take this chart and move it forward to the end of 2022, the longer term trend looks like this. And if you lay that trend line over it, indeed, we're kind of right on that longer term trend line. We are where we probably would have been had COVID not hit. And if you look at the sort of the recovery line, looks like this. Most markets have hit an inflection point, and most markets you're seeing PUM continue down on that line. When I did this back in 2020, I thought I'd be pretty close to it, but
you nailed it.
The idea that 3 years later would be sitting there almost looking like I had made up the data.
Well, and the implication here is musical chairs, correct? This is PUM, which I assume is the currency for the total available ad spend in a market for radio. And the fact that we're expressing this declination as an 8% attrition yearly, that rating points are going to get lower, or I should say PUM is going to get lower, and as a result, revenue is getting lower. Have you found there to be a fairly tight correlation between market revenue and PUM?
There is. And if you think about that, if you want to kind of think about the math, cost per points in radio have really not changed that much over time.
Yep.
And so a PUM rating becomes a pretty solid indicator of revenue. So as you project PUM, you project revenue. PUM should figure into your market revenue projections as you look year to year. There is a fairly tight correlation with the market level PUM ratings and the market level revenue. And if you look at this back at the beginning of this trend in early 2018, we were at almost 9 rating points of available audience. By the time we had gotten to late 2019, that had dropped down below 8 rating points. In that instance, for that month, 7.7. We hit the COVID low, which was a benchmark low, a historic low. And in this particular market, the 25-54 total week AQH rating in the market for persons 25-54 was a 3.8, rating points. We recovered back to about 6 rating points. And as of the end of 2022, we were sitting at about 5 rating points of available audience in the market. So definitely downward pressure on rating points. And you'll see if you do this for your market, pretty tight correlation to market revenue as well. And some markets are above that longer term trend line. There are a few that are below it, but most more or less are kind of going along with that longer term trend.
So for those of us throwing rating parties, because we've managed to beat the competition and went up 0.2 of a share in demo Monday through Friday, 6A to 7P. Before you get too excited and you notice that your sales manager is absent from the rating party, there's a good reason why. I would imagine that in the same way that PUM correlates to total market revenue, that it's not share, but average quarter hour rating that is so tightly correlated with the amount of money that a radio station can make.
And I think as you'd say that it's AQH rating that drives revenue in a sales day part, morning drive, daytime, PM drive. AQH rating translates into average unit rate. And on the broader day part, there's a really tight correlation between the AQH rating and your total spot revenue. This can also be broken out by total revenue. You can look at it for national, you can look at it for local. But this is a typical market. The dark blue line is the AQH rating trend over time, from beginning in 2018 through current. The green line is the monthly revenue. So you can see back in the early part of the chart where the ratings were kind of in the 0.4 and 0.5 range, that revenue even tipped $1 million a month. And in 2020, when we hit the low point of COVID, there were fortunately only one period here where the station hit a 0.1 rating, but you can see the revenue dropped to as low as $200,000 a month. And as ratings have increased, have recovered, revenue has increased and recovered. And it's actually a really interesting correlation, because if you look at 2019 and you take the average rating for 2019 for this station was a 3.3 average rating. And the station was generating average monthly revenue at about $700,000 per month. And during the COVID year of 2020, the average rating dropped to a 0.23, and average revenue dropped to $430,000 per month in revenue. So when you look at that correlation, the ratings index was a 69, the revenue index was a 62, and basically that's telling you that a tenth of a rating point on the broad day part was worth about $200,000, unfortunately in this scenario on the downside to a radio station. So as a tenth of a rating point went down, revenue went down in lockstep with it. So now looking at the recovery from 20 to 21, the average rating for the year went from a 0.2 to a 0.34. The average revenue went from $430,000 a month to $600,000 a month.
Boy,
and when you actually look at that correlation, if you look at the third line, average ratings, there's your 0.24 rating versus the 0.34 rating in the recovery year. That's a 141 index in the green box over to the right. The average revenue was $430,000, recovered to $600,000. That revenue index was a 140. And market after market, you see really tight correlations. It's never always, like
perfect.
one index point off, but within a couple, it's a tight correlation, and that suggests that the revenue for a tenth of a rating point up in this instance was $175,000 a month. So if you are, just on the border between a 0.2 and a 0.3, it's a significant upside in revenue if you can just be above that line.
So I think it would be important for folks to see what kind of disparity there is between average quarter hour rating and the potential variance in share that could really count for the same thing revenue wise, just to really sear the point home.
Well, if you take an AQH trend line over time And in this instance, if you see at the tab at the top where it says Monday through Sunday, 6 a.m. to midnight, this is average quarter hour persons, 25.54 for a, this is a top 10 market. Early on, I guess I should point out that there are two lines on this. The dark blue line is the 3-month average AQH, whereas the teal line is the individual month. And early on, we were looking at AQH in the about 30,000 range, and you see the pre-COVID trend down. But the thing that I have added to this chart that's different than most trendline charts are these 3 red bars. Because if you want to talk about a 0.2 rating, a 0.2 rating is 15,500 persons. 15,500 divided by the population gives you a 0.2 rating. That's an exact 0.2. But the reality of it is there's a number below that, in this case 11,600 persons, that rounds up to the 0.2 rating. And at the top of the range, 19,300 persons rounds down to a 0.2. So every AQH between 11,006 and 19,300 translates to a 0.2 rating. And there's a rather large range in share between that bottom and the top.
Are you able to, by any chance, translate this into share?
Oh, look at so that. If you take, I happen to use the March 22 PUM number just to do the shares going to vary month to month, depending on the actual PUM. But using the March 22 number, a 3.6 share was a 0.2 rating, a 6 share was a 0.2 rating, a 0.48 share was an exact 0.2 rating. But what this is basically telling you is that everything between a 3.6 share and a 6 share was the same rating point. And as far as the sales department was concerned, they were going to be able to monetize it at that 0.2 level.
Just leave that on the screen. Just leave that on the screen for one more second. I just want to go back to that just to make sure we understand that there's almost a 2x difference, not quite, between the low end of the range, the top end of the range, and that would count the same in terms of the monetizable average quarter hour rating.
And there's certainly movement within the within a ranker where you're going to move up in rank from a 3.6 share to a 6.0 share. A lot of radio stations will be playing in that 0.2 range.
Sure.
So you can have a high 0.2 or you can have a low 0.2. But from the sales department's point of view,
it's 0.2 is a 0.2.
As a 0.2. Yep. And the reality of it is if you look at this, over time, everything that's in this highlighted rectangle was a 0.2 rating. And you can see that there were some months, and in fact, kind of the summer of 21 here, where the station had gotten back into the 0.3 range, and with downward pressure on PUM and other market factors, basically has been operating in that 0.2 range since. So a lot of movement, but in terms of revenue, it becomes very predictable when you look at the available audience, the market revenue generated by that available audience at the market level, and then you bring it down to the individual station, and you see what a tenth of a rating point is worth. So that upper line means a lot of revenue to the sales department. And this is a chart that you can create. I'll zoom in here, but basically what this is showing you is so that you can keep track of where that next tenth of rating point comes from. In this instance, the current month, the station had a 19,100 AQH. It's a 5/8 share, and you can see that over on the left hand, the color, the columns here that show you the 0.2. In order to get to a 0.3, 19,700 persons is your first AQH that rounds to a 0.3 rating. And conversely, if you were to drop below 11,800 persons or a 3.6 share, you would be dropping into the 0.1 range. So all AQHs between that 11,008 and 19,006 all translate to a 0.2 rating. So it's, there is a real tight correlation with
Mark,
station revenue.
thank you for this analysis. I know the truth hurts, and sometimes it's not great to be on the receiving end of not the best news in the world. But remember, you're here watching this presentation, which means you're now armed with the facts and you understand how the game is played. And remember, if you haven't watched the setup video to this, PJ Kling and I, who are both the marketing experts at New Voodoo, we showed you how we can take a 1 million person metro and distill it down to about 11,200 people who will make or break your ratings. Now, part of what happens during that process is the part that Mark is expert at, and he helps a lot of our clients who market through us with the ratings analysis. And then we take, once we understand that geography, we use our data-driven playbook to find the people most likely to be able to move the needle. So over the next few sessions, we're going to show you some ways that our data would suggest are the easiest, low resistance way to help you move the needle, not just in terms of tenths of a share, but tenths of a rating, because that's how the game is won or lost. Hey, Mark, thanks so much for your time today.
Enjoyed it. Thanks, Mike.
New Voodoo builds digital products and conducts research and marketing campaigns for clients.
It's easy to get in touch. Drop us a line at tellmemore@newvoodoo.com.